Is it okay?
Yes, Dr. Chung. Yes.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, GAMHA, for having me. My name is Chan-Seung Chung, a psychiatrist from Seoul, Korea. For the past several years, I have been working at the crossroads of mental health and journalism. And I recently published a paper on this subject titled Trauma-empathetic Journalism. Tonight, I want to do two things in 10 minutes. Give you a brief map of the forms of trauma that are distinctive to journalists. And then tell you about the response I believe in most, peer support. First, the scale of the problem. 80 to 100% of journalists are exposed to traumatic events through their work. Among war and conflict journalists, the lifetime prevalence of PTSD is around 29%, and depression around 21%, several times higher than in the general population. But numbers alone miss the point. What makes journalists distinctive is not only how often they are exposed, but how many different doors trauma can enter through. Tonight, I will show you 5. Secondary and vicarious trauma, media-induced trauma, moral injury, physical threats in the field, and online violence. The first door is other people's pain. As you know, Charles Figley showed that hearing the trauma of others can produce in the helper symptoms nearly identical to PTSD. He called it secondary traumatic stress. And journalists, like therapists and nurses, are a high-risk group because empathic listening is precisely the tool of a good interview. The injury enters through empathy itself. When it strikes acutely, nightmares and intrusive images of a story you only heard, we speak of secondary trauma. When it accumulates slowly, quietly, reshaping how a journalist sees the world. Nowhere is safe, no one can be trusted. We call it vicarious trauma. One is a wound, the other is an erosion. The second door is the screen. After the Boston Marathon bombing, researchers found something startling. People who consumed 6 or more hours of bombing-related media a day showed acute stress higher than some people who had actually been at the scene. For journalists, this is daily life. Video editors and fact-checkers work with graphic user-generated footage for hours. In one study, 22% did so for more than 6 hours a day. And what predicts symptoms is not the length of a single session, but the frequency of exposure day after day. This is media-induced trauma. Exposure through a screen is still exposure. The third door is conscience. Moral injury was first described by Jonathan Shai in Vietnam veterans. The wound that appears when what you do or fail to do violates your own moral code. Journalists know it well. Filming a person in danger instead of helping, knocking on the bereaved family's door for a deadline, watching your own newsroom betray the standards it taught you. The dominant feeling is not fear, it is guilt, shame, and disgust with oneself. Among journalists covering the refugee crisis, researchers found moral injury to be more dominant than PTSD. And moral injury does not respond to safety alone. It calls for meaning, forgiveness, and community. The fourth and fifth doors are violence itself. War zones, disaster sites, and increasingly ordinary streets, protests where a press base can attract attack rather than prevent it. And online, violence that follows journalists home. In a global ICFJ and UNESCO study, 73% of women journalists had experienced online violence, and unlike a single event, it is chronic and unpredictable. There is no after to come home to. The result is what ICFJ UNESCO calls the chilling effect: self-censorship, avoiding certain beats, and leaving the profession. It is a form of violence that silences journalism itself. So, what can be done? Professional treatment matters. I'm a psychiatrist after all, but the most promising and most scalable response we have found is peer support. Colleagues trained to support colleagues. Why does it work? Because the biggest barrier is not a shortage of therapists. It is silence. In one study, only about 1 in 3 journalists affected by traumatic imagery felt they could talk to their managers. A peer speaks the same language, carries no stigma, and is already there. In the newsroom, on the assignment, research by Elena Newman and colleagues suggests that for journalists, peer support can sometimes be more effective than starting with an unfamiliar therapist. Always a complement to professional care, never a replacement. And each heart is simple enough to teach in an evening. Inform, listen, and connect. And it works in practice. Pan America distinguishes organic peer support, what colleagues already do for one another, from structured programs that train peer supporters and link them to professionals. Newsrooms need both. The Australian broadcaster ABC has run a newsroom-wide peer support program for years, and in Korea, journalists now meet monthly, one Saturday morning every month, in a peer support group I have the honor of accompanying. Simple debriefing rituals after hard assignments are what journalists themselves say they want most. For mental health advocates like all of you, this is the opening. Help newsrooms build these small structures of solidarity. Let me close with the words I always share at the end of my lectures for journalists. Everything starts from solidarity. Trauma disconnects people from their sense of safety, from others, from themselves. But empathy reconnects. A society whose journalists understand trauma reports more humanely. And a society that hears humane stories hears better. And now, to show you what this looks like inside the newsroom, I'm delighted to hand over to Ms. Jung-Hae Lee. Thank you very much.